That was the granddaughter of famed atomic bomb maker J. Robert Oppenheimer, who is the focus of the new blockbuster Oppenheimer. And with renewed interest in the atomic testing era, it's important to also look at the decades-long impact atomic testing left on Americans, the environment, and generations to come. In collaboration with digital producer Rachel Zalecki, this is the story of Downwinders, a true Las Vegas story. Like a feather in the wind.
You can't control where the wind goes, where the radiation goes.
In this vast Nevada desert are the tales of people who live to tell them, and those who no longer can.
My grandfather always used to tell us kids, stop kicking dust, because he knew. He didn't want us breathing it. As I grew up, some of them became missing. It was a cancer. My uncle's throat fell out.
Ian Zabardi is the principal man for Shoshone Nations.
Most of my family live on the Duckwater Shoshone Indian Reservation, which is about 300 miles from Las Vegas.
His story is personal.
You know, I feel like I'm being stalked by death. I went home to the reservation for good from California and began to understand that my family's dying.
Talk to me about the necklace and kind of the significance that that has.
Thousands of workers. My uncle made this, and I wear it as out of respect for him and the suffering that he went through. My people, we just cannot pick up and leave, you know, in the event of the radiation, the fallout. We lose our identity. My family have suffered the adverse health consequences known to be plausible from exposure to radiation and fallout from U.S. nuclear weapons testing.
Ian is a downwinder. Downwinders are Americans who were exposed to atomic and nuclear above-ground testing debris in the 1950s and 60s. Americans whose lives have forever been changed.
There are near downwinders and far downwinders. So a near downwinder, I would see anybody within 100, 150 miles. But as you get further out, you can still have acute exposures because the fallout cloud would go across the land, and if it encountered rain, the rain would bring it to the ground. I've been out to the test site hundreds of times over the past 40 years.
Located roughly 65 miles outside of Las Vegas, somewhere in Mercury, Nevada, sits the Nevada National Security Site, previously known as Nevada Test Site, the former home of atomic and nuclear testing. It took place from 1945 to 1992. During this time, the U.S. government released 100 atmospheric atomic bombs and 921 underground tests.
It was the biggest radiological disaster in U.S. testing history.
Kevin Camps is a radioactive waste specialist.
When the Nevada test site was opened in 1951, one of the, again, Atomic Energy Commission documents has revealed the attitude of the officials making decisions, and it was that cowboys, Indians, and Mormons are a low-use segment of our population. So they felt okay about the fallout.
The toxins landing on people, livestock, and vegetation hundreds of miles away from ground zero.
These poisons, they're not natural, and it causes cancer, it causes birth defects, it causes genetic damage.
The people of Shoshone Nation taking a direct hit.
Even our prayers could be exposing us through these unique lifestyle practices that we have. There's a canyon of dead wood. Good place to go get wood for heating the house. So we're using the wood in our houses. We're using the wood in our campfires. We're using the wood in our sweats. The wood burns, creates the smoke, and the smoke is now a transport pathway.
it created an epidemic of thyroid pathology in the United States.
So many people are just not aware of how much radiation that's spread all the way across the United States and beyond. Where are you?
We're at the Atomic Museum, outside of the Atomic Museum here in Las Vegas. From his ranch in Montana, former Las Vegas resident Kirk Gladwin with the National Cancer Benefit Center spoke to me about his work with downwinders for the last 25 years.
I helped a lot of people, of course, that worked at the Nevada test site, and some of which, of course, came out of Area 51. I guess it was back in about the middle 1990s. You know, I started helping people with claims for having cancer that were subjected to government-created radiation.
In 1990, the government recognized people who were exposed to radiation when Congress passed the Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, known as RECA. The RECA Act provides downwinders with a one-time payment of $50,000, but only if you live in certain counties in Nevada, and it doesn't include Clark County.
There's a bill that is to add the rest of Clark County and Mojave County, which is, just across the border into Arizona.
In a bipartisan national defense bill, on Thursday, Senator Jackie Rosen also fought to expand eligibility for Nevadans when it came to RECA benefits. The bill now waits for a conference committee between the House and Senate for final approval. Camp says for many downwinders like Ian Zabardi, qualifying for RECA is next to impossible.
New Mexicans, many of them indigenous or Latinx, downwind of the Trinity explosion on July 16, 1945, have never been acknowledged as downwinders.
Decades later, a victory. Thursday evening, the U.S. Senate passed an amendment to RECA, expanding eligibility to finally include New Mexico downwinders. But the fight continues because the bill is set to expire next May, meaning compensation for downwinders could soon come to an end. And the bombings impacted both soldiers who served overseas and those who survived and grew up in the rubble. We do want to warn you that some of the content you're about to see is graphic and disturbing.
助けてあげられなくてごめんなさい. I'm very sorry I cannot save you.
Whoever survived, sometimes it was better off they were dead. They were suffering so much.
In his poem, August 6, poet Toge Senkichi writes, "City of 300,000, can we forget that silence?"
That's what happened here.
My aunt was 13 years old and she was in junior high school and they were outside. But when it happened, her scalp and the face all melted over her. She walked all night to get home. I don't know how she got home. She was blinded.
And then these are my grandparents.
And then she died in my grandmother's arms. That was a blessing because some people couldn't find their children, but at least she had her.
In that stillness, the powerful appeal of the white eye sockets of the wives and children who did not return home.
This is my aunt who told me about the story all the time.
Two of my older aunts, they were in high school and they were late that day. All the building collapsed on the students and they were in the back of the room, so they didn't get crushed.
Kumiko Noriega has heard the atrocities of war.
While they were walking home, they saw so many people dragging something. So they looked at them and said, what are they dragging? And their own skin, their faces, their hair was just hanging. I have to show you some of the pictures. Victims drew pictures of this.
That's the skin.
That's the skin.
They set up camp in Japan. That's my dad.
It's like my dad never talked about the war.
See all the devastation down here.
But when he opened up the trunks, that brought him all back. It took him back to the war. He took these pictures for the government. He was in the Marine Corps as a photographer.
I've always liked that picture. That man has seen a lot.
He understood what he was witnessing was something historically important.
So this is that boy that I just showed you, that with the burned back, that's him as a man now.
Sumitaro Taniguchi was like 12 years old when the bomb went off, and Dad photographed him when he was just a boy in the hospital, laying on his stomach with burns all over his back. He felt like he exploited the victims by taking their photos, but he also realized it was very important to document.
This was the Japanese book.
Kumiko Noriega and Tygo O'Donnell have never
A
met.
Quiet Evening Aboard the USS Thomas Jefferson, July 23rd, 27th, 1945.
And still, they have different yet eerily similar stories of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. I was invited to join them around their dinner tables,
Green tea is good for you.
sharing tea, homemade sushi,
On the way up the mountainside, this was taken. Him on his horse.
and endless war photos.
I was born and raised in Hiroshima. And since I was a little girl, I heard all about the scars left in Hiroshima. To me, it's very, very painful experience. This should never, ever happen again.
He was there for 6 months. He went in a few weeks after the bombs were dropped, and he went all over Japan, but mostly Nagasaki. There is still controversy about whether it was justified to drop the bombs, and Dad was adamantly, for a peaceful resolve to the war and not using the bombs.
The uranium bomb in Hiroshima, the plutonium bomb in Nagasaki were actually listed by the U.S. Department of Energy as nuclear weapons tests.
Kevin Camps is a radioactive waste specialist. He sat down with me to talk about the impact building the bomb had on those who created it and the destruction it left in its wake. The new blockbuster movie Oppenheimer bringing attention not only to the bomb's creation, but also the mental anguish Oppenheimer and other scientists felt over the bomb's creation and detonation.
A colleague just put it that the reason that Oppenheimer was excommunicated from the nuclear priesthood was he was insufficiently enthusiastic about the hydrogen bomb. He'd already had remorse about atomic weapons.
You can't put a cap on how many victims in Japan died from the atomic bomb because they're still dying.
Hiroshima, the damage was wider because it was delta.
The difference on this bomb from the regular bomb is radiation.
Dad's exposure, he was exposed to radiation, and it affected his health, years later, and softened his bones.
The horrors forever etched in the hearts, minds, and on the bodies of those who lived through it.
They started rebuilding immediately.
Out of the rubble,
We are very thankful. And so many American doctors and researchers came, and then they treated atomic bomb victims free.
hope blossomed.
People, were so happy. They thought nothing would grow for 100 years. But the oleander started blooming. They said, oh my goodness, we have life. So they were so happy.
For several weeks, we have been diving deep into the history of the atomic bomb. This comes on the heels of the release of Oppenheimer, which renewed the interest in the atomic bomb, but also has ties to Las Vegas and Nevada.
We fell in love with the people in Las Vegas. Over the last 3 years, I've probably been there, 15 or 20 times. I've been there so much, and I've gotten to know people. There's something about when you get to meet the people in that city. It's a remarkable place.
That's the same sentiment I have for Vegas. It's just, this place has, it's been home. Las Vegas, home to roughly 650,000 Nevadans who share the glitz, glam, and bright lights of their city with over 35 million tourists a year, most of whom will never venture off the Strip.
The first time I'd been there without leaving the Strip, and it was like, there is a real community here.
Mark Shapiro was once that tourist. Until inspiration came in an unlikely form. Downwinders isn't just like a term that people throw around. How did you first become familiar with downwinders?
It was interesting. I was actually doing some research on hiking and things like that in St. George, Utah, of all things. I was reading about the city, and then I read about this place called Snow Canyon where they shot a lot of movies. There was a John Wayne film called The Conqueror that was shot in St. George. We dug deeper, and I found an article from 1980 in People magazine online. Did America Kill John Wayne? An incredible statistic that I read about the film is nearly half of the cast and crew on The Conqueror apparently died of cancer, likely connected to radiation, some fallout that had happened about 135 miles from St. George at the Nevada test site.
Step back with me into the 1950s.
3, 2, 1.
Vegas as a city was sort of an entry point, a frontier point where folks arrived who were doing the testing, including some of the troops.
A booming time for Las Vegas, literally and figuratively.
The United States bombed Nevada with nuclear weapons more than 120 times before testing was moved underground in the early 1960s.
What's interesting about Mercury in Vegas is during the time of testing, there were parties. People would go on the top of the rooftops of casinos and watch the bombs. Often they happened really, really early in the morning. They would have cocktail parties, beauty contests where they had, Miss Atomic Bomb.
In a city that coined the term, what happens in Vegas stays in Vegas, that was not accurate for atomic bomb testing. In fact, the infamous mushroom clouds would go up and eventually come down.
The U.S. mainland was exposed to radiation.
So in this country, they tried to get the meteorology right. They tried to avoid Vegas. They tried to avoid Los Angeles. It didn't always work.
Due to a change in wind direction, the residue from this morning's atomic detonation is drifting in the direction of St. George.
But what it meant was when they got the meteorology just like they wanted it and put the test off, that places like St. George, Utah got inundated with radioactive fallout.
There is no danger. Parents need not be alarmed about children at school.
But truth be told, it went all over the country.
People have to remember that even if you weren't there to breathe in the radioactive fallout, it rained, and of course the fallout fell to the ground, got into the grass, the cows eat the grass, the kids are drinking the milk.
Kirk Gladwin has been fighting for downwinders since the 90s. The former Las Vegas resident started his work here, locally, before moving to Montana, where he's continued his fight for RECA expansion and compensation for downwinders. The Radiation Exposure Compensation Act, also known as RECA, grants a one-time payment of $50,000 to affected downwinders, but it's limited only to parts of Nevada, Arizona, and Utah.
There is no question anymore. We know how much fallout there was. And so now it's just a question of people getting on board, it becoming an important issue.
It's a complicated issue because I don't know how it could have been handled better. Yes, more people should qualify. No one in our film qualified for RECA funding. No one that we interviewed qualified for RECA funding because they lived outside of the counties that were covered. No one in Las Vegas would be covered.
The issue's so important to Kirk, he connected me with Mark Shapiro.
Can you see me okay?
Who, after driving for over 12 hours to Reno for his documentary debut...
I feel so bad. It's really good to meet you, by the way.
Nice to meet you too.
Thanks for sticking with me on this crazy car drive. It was just a long day.
Met with me on Zoom at 10 p.m. He explained to me what drove him to invest all his money into creating Downwind, a labor of love, featuring Las Vegas local Ian Zabardi, a downwinder himself, and downwinders from neighboring states.
There is no amount of money that can replace losing a 6-year-old daughter or a sister or a mom or, parents, family members and neighbors. That all of the downwinders in our film, they talk about that. They're people that were impacted by these detonations, and yet they're inspirational. They're going around the world telling people about, the danger of this, because none of us were taught this in history.
Giving a voice to those who have gone voiceless for far too long.
They appreciate what we're doing, telling this truth, telling the story about something so close to Las Vegas, and it's a real Las Vegas story.
That includes James Andrel, who lives right here in Las Vegas, an atomic veteran, a soldier who during the 70s served with the battalion on the first ever cleanup and rehabilitation of the Marshall Islands. This is his story.
I was out there for 6 months, 179 days. We didn't know if we were going to come home. It was a battle that we were fighting, and we didn't even know it. I got over there, and when we got there, they said, this is radioactive. And I said, excuse me? I was sent to Eniwetok to take part of nuclear cleanup in the South Pacific on Eniwetok Atoll.
45 years later, Jim lives in an endless loop, reliving the past, fighting for the future. If you hadn't done that tour, how different would your life be right now?
A lot. I would have gone to General Motors Institute. Probably would have retired out at somewhere very high up the ladder with General Motors. My father worked for him, my grandfather did, my uncles, aunts. I would have not worried about having children. I would have not put my wife through everything. I mean, the PTSD, that's what did it.
That was my going away party.
James Andrel served with the U.S. Army's 84th Engineer Battalion.
I was almost done with my duty in the military. I had a short timers calendar. I was stationed at Fort Bragg, North Carolina in 1978, and I only had 6 months and 8 days left in the service. When I went down to speak to my CO, I explained to him that I would only have 9 days left when I got back. He said, well, you're the only man I got, so you're going to go to a tropical island that's going to be a paradise. You're going to love it. Anytime they tell you that, they're lying.
That's a temporary hooch. That's what the guys lived in.
As soon as we landed and deboarded the plane, we were told that it was radioactive.
You could see the islands in the background.
A year before the project started, the U.S. government dropped all this stuff, just spilled it all out on the island and never bothered to bury it, crypt it, entomb it, whatever.
Shark fishing on the causeway between Lozwa and Aylman.
You had to walk around in that. We drank the water, we breathed the air, we swam in the ocean.
I believe it's travel orders.
They don't allow anybody on those islands anymore.
From 1977 to 1980, over 6,000 American service members from the Army, Air Force, and Navy served as part of the Marshall Island cleanup, a first-of-its-kind project that aimed to clean up and rehabilitate the islands. The effort coming on the heels of a lawsuit filed by the residents of Eniwetok Atoll and Bikini Atoll, both islands evacuated by the United States in 1946 to perform nuclear testing.
These are just my diving instruction sheets.
We didn't have any protective gear. We couldn't even get a face mask. Our normal uniform was a pair of shorts, a pair of boots, socks, and a boonie hat. We didn't even wear a shirt because we had to wear them over our face because the dust was so bad and radioactive on top of it. I lived in a bunker.
There was an air conditioner in there to keep the equipment cool.
It was built in 1948, and they used that to house all the proponents to the bombs, all of the nuclear proponents. I had a lot of unexplained illnesses also after I left there. They claimed that when we got back, we had the bones of a 70-year-old man. I had 43 different illnesses. I now have 42. My skin would break out in tiny little blisters everywhere. I had my gallbladder removed, and in 2 weeks to the day, I went in for the cancer surgery. When I met my wife, I told her, you may not want to get involved with me. And she said, why? And I said, well, I was on a nuclear project in the middle of the Pacific, and I'm pretty sure I've been exposed, which means no kids.
We got married.
Jim and Beverly Andrew got married December 5th, 1981.
Such a baby face.
Jim calls it the best day of his life. Their 42-year marriage has blessed them with 3 kids.
Our firstborn was a real shock. He had a stroke in utero. Chief pediatric neurologist, he says, this is kind of off-the-wall question, but he says, I'm going to ask you anyways, has either of you been exposed to radiation?
To this day, he can't feel anything on his right side. He can't pick up a coin out of your hand or anything like that. He's suffered, a lot. He has seizures, and he's now 35.
They said I was not eligible for this award. And my name was the 4th one down on the 2nd row.
It's disheartening because I've been doing this for a decade now, 6 different kinds of cancer. We get close to these guys and then, I find out they got cancer. For them to continue on and continue to deny these guys benefits, even though the PACT Act is passed.
The PACT Act is the largest healthcare and benefit expansion bill in VA history. It was passed in 2022.
An atomic veteran originally was someone that had participated in the actual blast.
The bill is designed to help veterans who have been exposed to toxic chemicals, like radiation, specifically naming and expanding eligibility to atomic veterans who helped clean up an Eniwetok.
After that was the PACT Act, and they granted us the title of Atomic Veteran. I asked for my humanitarian award, my Good Conduct Medal. I wanted my Cold War veteran. They all said I wasn't eligible for any of it, that I was never there. The first VSO that I got to work with claimed, you were never there. And I said, yes, I was. He said, prove it. So I faxed him my travel orders. I faxed him my order sheet to be sent over. I sent him photos, and finally I had sent him quite a bit of stuff. And he got to the point where he finally said, all right, stop sending me stuff. I don't need any more stuff. I believe you were there. I feel bad because every guy that was there has experienced the same thing. They've had the same issues. You're not eligible. Even with the PACT Act,